What if I told you there are communities living on floating islands that are actually edible? Or that the sand and rock used to build just one luxury island could create a wall that completely encircles the entire planet? From a multi-billion-dollar Japanese airport that just can't stop sinking, to an expanding landmass in a tropical paradise made entirely out of trash, these man-made marvels are full of incredible historic and geographic secrets. Here are some of the most incredible geography facts you never knew about human-made artificial islands. Let's start with the undisputed heavyweight champion. When you think of an artificial island, you might picture a small sandy resort. But the Netherlands took that concept and blew it apart. They built the Flevopolder, the world's largest artificial island, covering an astounding 374 square miles. This wasn't built for luxury tourism. It was built for survival. The Dutch reclaimed this land from the Zuiderzee, a shallow inland sea, using a complex system of dikes, dams, and massive pumps. Officially established in 1986, it is now home to hundreds of thousands of residents, bustling cities like Almere and Lelystad, and thriving farmland. It stands as a perfect monument to the famous saying, "God created the earth, but the Dutch created the Netherlands." But the Dutch were not the first master island builders. Long before modern dredging ships, the ancient Aztecs were doing the same thing. In the 14th century, they founded their capital, Tenochtitlan, on a small natural island in the middle of Lake Texcoco. To accommodate a booming population, they expanded outward using an ingenious system called Chinampus. They built rectangular enclosures in the shallow lake bed using wattle, then filled them with mud and rotting vegetation. These so-called floating gardens eventually rooted to the lake floor, creating highly fertile, stable land. At its height, Tenochtitlan was one of the largest and most advanced cities in the world, connected to the mainland by massive causeways. Today, its remnants lie buried beneath modern-day Mexico City, a sprawling metropolis whose foundations were literally built by hand on an ancient artificial lake island. Speaking of massive scale, let's move to Dubai and the Palm Jumeirah. This is perhaps the most famous artificial island in the modern world, instantly recognizable from space by its palm tree shape. But the sheer volume of materials used is more mind-boggling than the design. Engineers bypassed concrete and steel, building the entire island from natural rock and sand. They dredged over 3.2 billion cubic feet of sand from the Persian Gulf and used over 7 million tons of rock, sourced from over a dozen quarries, to build the protective crescent breakwater. To put that in perspective, the sand alone would fill 2.5 Empire State Buildings. And that protective wall? If you took all that rock and lined it up, you could build a 3-foot-high wall that circles the entire Earth. That is not an exaggeration. That is the scale of a single artificial island. However, building on sand has its risks, as Japan learned the hard way. Meet Kansai International Airport, a multi-billion-dollar engineering marvel that is also a geographic nightmare. Built on a man-made island in Osaka Bay, it was designed to relieve congestion in one of Japan's busiest cities. But there's a problem. The seabed is made of soft alluvial clay. When they placed the 2.5 million ton island on top, the clay began to squish and compress. Engineers predicted the island would settle about 19 feet over 50 years. The problem is that it is sinking faster than predicted, already passing that mark. Today, the entire terminal building stands on adjustable hydraulic jacks. Every few months, workers literally raise the building to keep it level with the runways. So far, they have spent over $1 billion just to keep the airport from sinking into the sea. If sinking is a problem, what about growing? In the South Pacific, the nation of Tuvalu is locked in a losing battle with rising sea levels. But they found a bizarre solution, leasing its land to a tech startup that plans to build a floating seastead. Meanwhile, in the Caribbean, one island is growing entirely by accident. The Filifushi, near the Maldives, started as a garbage dump. For decades, trucks dumped trash onto a natural lagoon sandbar. Over time, the rubbish compacted, mixed with sand, and chemically bonded. Today, What was once a shallow reef is now a solid landmass big enough to have an industrial complex, a fuel farm, and even housing for thousands of workers. It is officially called an artificial island, but in reality, it is the world's first island built from pure human waste and trash. Not all artificial islands are about land reclamation, though. Some are about power. In the North Sea, Belgium is building the Princess Elizabeth Island. This is not a place to live. It is the world's first artificial energy island. It will serve as a massive offshore power grid, connecting hundreds of wind turbines back to the mainland. And in Japan, they built the Hashima Island, also known as Gunkanjima or Battleship Island. Once a coal mining facility packed with over 5,000 workers on a tiny concrete slab of land, it was the most densely populated place on Earth. When the coal ran out, everyone left overnight. It sat abandoned and decaying for decades until it was reopened as a UNESCO heritage site. Today, it is a ghost island, a crumbling concrete maze where nature is slowly reclaiming the ruins of Japan's Industrial Revolution. That need for housing also drove one of the most unusual island projects in history, the floating islands of Lake Titicaca in Peru and Bolivia. These are not man-made in the engineering sense, but they are entirely human-constructed. The Uros people build their homes on islands made of tatora reeds. These reeds are edible, by the way, providing both food and building material. When the reeds at the bottom rot away, the residents simply pile fresh reeds on top. The islands float, they bounce, and they're soft underfoot. And if an enemy approaches, the Uros can simply untie their island and float away. It is mobile, edible geography. But perhaps the most bizarre story of all comes from the Arctic. During the Cold War, the Soviets built a secret nuclear submarine base on a completely artificial island of gravel. They called it Object 302, or the nuclear lighthouse of the Arctic. This floating concrete fortress was buried inside a man-made hill on the coast of the Barents Sea. It was so secret that it didn't appear on any map. Inside, it housed a nuclear reactor and a crew who lived in total isolation. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the workers walked away, leaving the reactors humming. 4 years, it sat abandoned, a radioactive ghost island on top of the world, until a dangerous international mission finally removed the nuclear fuel. Moving from the freezing Arctic to the scorching desert, Saudi Arabia is attempting to build the most ambitious artificial archipelago on Earth, the Blueprinting Project. They are constructing a massive map of the world using 300 artificial islands off the coast of Dubai. Wait, no, that's the world. Actually, let's clarify. Dubai built the world, a collection of 300 islands shaped like a global map. But unlike the palm, those islands are failing. They're slowly sinking back into the sea because they don't have a strong breakwater. The sand is washing away, and today most of the world is empty, barren sandbars. Yet the desire to reshape the planet continues. In China, they have leveled entire mountains to build artificial islands in the South China Sea. They're using massive dredging ships called magic islands to pump sand and coral into the ocean, creating military bases on reefs that were once underwater. On Mischief Reef, they built a runway, radar systems, and a harbor in less than 2 years. Geologists say this is the fastest landmass expansion in human history, faster even than the Dutch polders. But unlike the Netherlands, this new land is highly controversial, destabilizing entire regional alliances. Back in Europe, we find a different kind of island, the Motobud in Poland. These are small, floating cabins built by fishermen on lakes. They aren't technically islands, but when the ice melts, they drift. Over time, some fishermen built permanent wooden platforms that evolved into tiny shanty towns on the water. Without official permission, these communities are basically floating sovereign nations, complete with their own rules and electricity from solar panels. Then there is the story of the No Man's Land Fort in England. Built in the Solent in the 1860s to defend Portsmouth from Napoleon III, this massive stone fort sits on a man-made shoal. It was a military failure because it was obsolete the day it was finished. For a century, it sat empty, used only for target practice. But in 2012, someone bought it. Today, it has been renovated into a luxury hotel with a rooftop pool and a helipad. It is probably the only artificial island in the world that started as a war machine and ended as a five-star resort. Speaking of repurposing, let's return to the idea of scale. The Flevopolder in the Netherlands is so large that it has its own weather patterns. Because it was dry land built in the middle of a former sea, the air heats up faster over the polder than over the surrounding water. This creates localized breezes and even unique cloud formations. You can see the outline of the island from space just by looking at the clouds. Finally, we end where we began, with the Dutch. They are now planning the world's largest artificial sandbank, the Sand Motor. Instead of building a static island, they dumped 28 million cubic yards of sand off the coast in a single hook-shaped peninsula. They then let the wind, waves, and currents spread that sand naturally up the coastline. In essence, they built an island designed to melt away. It is an artificial island that fights coastal erosion by becoming the sand itself. From edible floating homes to radioactive Arctic fortresses, from sinking airports to garbage dumps, turn geography. From ancient Aztec ingenuity to modern Chinese military construction. These artificial islands prove one thing. Humans will never stop trying to reshape the planet. And sometimes we even succeed.